Hey guys, this video is going to go over order of operations, but this time it's going to be with fractions and decimals. So we already know how to do the order of operations, but it'll just be a little bit harder because there'll be fractions and decimals and you'll have to keep everything straight. So I'm going to do a couple with you and then you're going to get some time to try some. All right, so quick review, order of operations. Remember, you always do parentheses first. So don't forget, if you see any parentheses, do those right away. Second, remember if there's any exponents, you do that. We haven't really gotten to those. Third, you multiply and divide left to right. And finally, you add and subtract. So if you ever forget what order to do things, make sure you come back to this pyramid. All right, quick little refreshers when we are doing order of operations problems. To help you get them correct and to make sure you do things in the right order, it's helpful if you highlight any addition or subtraction problems. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. So I see a subtraction right here. That's kind of a highlighter. I also see one inside here that might kind of help me. All right, next I'm going to circle my terms. It says circle the terms. So I see a term back here. Remember, you never circle adding or subtraction signs. And then I see this big term here. Okay, next, inside here, oops, inside here, I am going to start with my parentheses. So remember, you never subtract right away. If it helps you, you can circle inside the parentheses. I'm just going to circle with a different color so you guys can see this. Okay, but I need to do this first inside my parentheses. So inside there, I'm just going to rewrite it. I have 4 minus 6, and then I still have my 5 out front. Okay, quick little refresher. Remember, make sure you add the opposite. So I am going to turn this to add the opposite, and I end up with negative 2 inside the parentheses times 5, which is negative 10. Now I'm going to come back to the second one. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Keep my minus sign in between, right? I'm just bringing that down. Lastly, I'm going to, again, add the opposite. Anytime you see subtraction, add the opposite. So negative 10 and negative 4 is negative 14. There's my final answer. So again, like I said, a couple quick refreshers. Make sure you circle terms, highlight adding and subtracting. Save adding and subtracting until the end, unless it's in parentheses, and then make sure you add the opposite. So now we'll get to some with fractions and decimals. All right, so here's our first one. I am going to go ahead and just highlight, I'm just going to use yellow, my addition sign. I see one addition sign, so I kind of highlighted that. Now I'm going to circle my terms. So I see a term right here. I'll circle that, and a term back here. I will circle or box that. So basically I have two things to do. I'm going to keep my addition sign, but I need to work out these two things that are here. So I need to do this problem and this problem. All right, so sometimes when you're doing these, you're going to have to do a little work. So the very first thing it says to do is take 17.5 divided by negative 7. So if I do that, I'm going to come down here and do it down here. So I need to do 17.5 divided by negative 7. Okay, so I'm going to start working that out. So 7 goes into 1 0 times. It goes into 17 twice. 2 times 7 is 14. All right, if I subtract that, I end up with 3. I need to bring down the 5. So 7 into 35 is 5 times, which is 35. I subtract, I get 0. Okay, make sure you bring your decimal straight up. So again, it was right here. I'm going to bring it straight up. So my answer is 2.5. And then I just need to remember, well, is it positive or negative? Well, a positive divided by a negative is a negative. So I get negative 0.25. So that's my answer for this first part, negative 0.25. All right, now I am going to just erase this work down here just because I want to have room on my screen. You should not erase it. You have places to show it on the side. Okay, my second part of the problem, I need to do back here. 2 times negative 8.1. So again, I'm going to come off to the side and I am going to work that out. So negative 8.1 times 2. Remember, you do not need to line up the decimals when you multiply. So 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 8 is 16. I don't have to do another row. Now to figure out where my decimal goes, I see one place after the decimal here. So I'm going to move it one place back. So remember, it starts at the end. So it starts right here, and then I move it one back, so I get 16.2. Okay, and then I just have to check for my negative sign. Positive times a negative is a negative. Okay, finally, I'm to my last step. I see negative 0.25 plus negative 16.2. Now these are both negatives, so they're the same, so I can add them together, and they'll still be negative. So I'm going to line up the decimals over here, 0.25 and then 16.2. I'll put a 0 there. Okay, and I'm going to be adding these, so just put my little plus, my little plus symbol here. I get 5, I get 4, decimal 6, and that. So my answer ends up being 16.45, and it is negative because I was putting a bunch of negatives together. All right, so let's try our next problem that has some fractions. So again, first thing, I would highlight, which I'm doing right now, the adding and subtracting symbols. And then I'm going to circle my terms. So I'm going to grab a different color here. So here's a term. This is a term. And this is a term. All right, now I'm going to do everything inside my terms. Well, the first term, there's nothing to do, so I just keep it as 1/3. The second term, which is right here, I need to actually do some work. So I'm going to multiply. Now remember, when you multiply, you can go straight across. If you want, you could simplify first, but since not everybody remembers to do that the first time, I'm just going to multiply. So I get 2, because I did 1 times 2. And then on the bottom, 2 times 3 is 6. Okay, so I have 2, 6, and then back here, there's nothing to do here, so it's just 3/4. Okay, now I'm going to rewrite my addition and subtraction sign, so I'm just bringing it straight down, so plus and minus. Okay, so the next thing that I would do is I would change the subtraction symbol to an addition, so I'm going to add the opposite. Okay, now that I have my problem, I like to write it going up and down, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to put it over here, so I have 1/3 plus 2 6 plus negative 3/4. Okay, my next step is to get a common denominator. Well, I know that 3, 6, and 4, they all go into 12, so I am going to make them all out of 12. All right, so to do that, I'm going to start with the first problem. I want to know, how do I get from 3 to 12? Well, I know that 3 times 4 is 12, so I need to do the same on the top. 1 times 4 is 4. Okay, my second one, I know that 6 times 2 is 12, so 2 times 2, I have to do the same thing, is 4. And then finally, down in the bottom, I know that 4 times 3 is 12, so negative 3 times 3 is negative 9. All right, my next step is, now that I have a common denominator of 12, I can add all of the numerators. So I'm going to add my numerators, which are 4, 4, and negative 9. So 4 plus 4 is 8. Now I need to add negative 9 to that. Well, these are different, so I'm going to subtract. So I end up with negative 1 over, my denominator was 12. So my final answer for this one is negative 1/12. All right, let's try one more. So again, I'm going to highlight my subtraction symbol. So that's kind of the first one I see right here. The other one's inside parentheses, so you do not have to highlight that until later. I like to circle my terms first. So I'm just going to grab a pen, and I'm going to circle my terms. So here is a term, 8 divided by 1/2. And then here is a term, 2 times all of that inside there. All right, so I'm going to start with the first term right here. So I need to do inside these parentheses first. So inside of those parentheses, I'm just going to kind of change the color here. Here's my outside set of parentheses. Inside here, the only thing I see is subtraction. When I see subtraction, I am going to turn it to add the opposite. Okay, so let's go ahead and turn it. Subtract, I'm going to turn it to add. The opposite of negative 3.1 is positive 3.1. So now I need to do inside of these parentheses. So negative 4.2 plus 3.1. Now those are different. They have different signs. One's negative, one's positive, so I'm going to subtract. Okay, so I'm going to come down here over to the side and do 4.2 minus 3.1. You have to line your decimals up when you subtract. So 2 minus 1 is 1, and 4 minus 3 is also 1. So I get 1.1. Now I just have to remember, is it negative or positive? Well, I had more negatives right here, so it's negative 1.1, still in parentheses, times 2. So I still need to finish this. So I'm going to come over to the side, and now I'm going to multiply negative 1.1 times 2. So if I do that, I'm going to come over here. I usually put the longer number on top, 1.1, times 2. Remember, you do not need to line the decimals up. Okay, so when I do this, 2 times 1, that is 2. And then 2 times this one is also 2. And then my decimal, I see one spot after the decimal, so I start on the end, move it one spot over, so I get 2.2. Now I have to check for my symbol. Well, I have a positive times a negative, which is a negative. All right, the next thing that I need to do is come to the second turn. I need to do 8 divided by a half. So again, I'm going to come down to the bottom, and I'm going to do a little work for that. So I have to do 8 divided by a half. Now remember, when you divide, I'm going to put a 1 underneath the 8, and my rule for division is you keep the first number, or stay, you switch division to multiplication, and you flip the second number, times 2 over 1. So now I'm going to multiply. 8 times 2 is 16 on the top, over 1, that's the same as 16. So I really get a 16 for up here. And then I keep my minus sign. Okay, so I have one more step to do. Before I do that, I'm going to erase my work down below. Okay, so now I see subtraction. I want to turn that to addition, so I'm going to change it to add. The opposite of 16 is negative 16. So now if you look at your two numbers, I have negative 2.2 plus negative 16. Those are both negatives, so I'm going to, they are the same, I can put them together. So I have 2.2 and 16. Remember, the decimal's after the 16. So I'm going to line that up. 16. I'm going to add those together, put a 0 there. I get 2, I get 8, I get 1. So I get 18.2, and I was putting negatives together, so negatives and more negatives are still negatives when you add. So I get negative 18.2 when I use the order of operations.